Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Ray. I'm a detransition male, and today I'm going to be reacting to this video from the Sci Guys about the science of trans athletes with Shuyler Bailar, who is a trans man athlete. So the premise of this podcast is, science. So let's see how scientific they get when talking about the science of trans athletes. Because I want to react to this clip because I think it perfectly illustrates why this issue is important, why I care about it, and why it's bigger than just the particular issue of making female sports fair. And it cuts into deeper issues in woke culture and gender theory, queer theory, trans theory, that stem from its postmodern intellectual heritage that attempts to break down the objectivity of the sex gender uh, distinction and makes it very difficult to talk about reality in a way that corresponds to the truth. So let's see what they have to say.
It's similar in the UK as well, actually. So we've recently had a whole issue with puberty blockers, which is basically one of the main issues that people have with this is going through male puberty. If you've gone through male puberty, that's you.
Notice how he says the word male puberty in air quotes. That's very important. I'm going to comment on that later, but just notice that he's using the term male puberty in air quotes.
Usually something that will outright, no, you're not allowed to do this. You're not allowed to do this if you've gone through a male puberty. But they're also restricting children from having puberty blockers to stop them from going through the puberty that they don't want to go through. And so it's very much a catch. It's almost a catch-22, as you said, like a categorical ban in everything.
It's designed that way, right? I think it's important to recognize that it's not like this isn't an accident. Oops,
oh no,
right? we accidentally did it this way. No, and so there's lots of the 12 years old. Also, I've talked to some doctors about this. The 12 years old is a sort of arbitrary number. Like why they chose 12 is interesting because there's nothing that specifically says 12 is the age. Tanner stage 2 is when hormones begin to be flooded throughout the body, and even if you did have access to gender affirming healthcare at the age of 12, you wouldn't actually have puberty blockers most likely before Tanner stage 2 of puberty. Usually they do it after or right in that stage because there's different requirements for how one actually uses puberty blockers. The other thing that I like to remind people is I encourage us not to say male puberty because that's actually very vague. Testosterone driven puberty is actually far more accurate, and also degenders it because many people, I think, who are, for example, trans women, that's not necessarily, they are not male, so they're not going through male puberty, they're going through testosterone driven puberty. So just a suggestion. Testosterone driven puberty, estrogen driven puberty, it's also, like I said, more accurate.
I realized that this is an audio format as well. I do this very often. I realized this is an audio format. When I said male puberty, I was giving the air quotes there.
Okay, this is like so rich. I can unpack this in so many layers. So this guy is apologizing for the fact that he didn't sufficiently put audible air quotes around the term male puberty. And the other person, the trans guy, he is saying that we need to degender the term male puberty because trans women are female. And so because trans women are female, they don't go through male puberty. They are females who go through testosterone puberty. This is such a confused way of speaking. And notice what Shuyler said. He said, I don't like the term male puberty because it's vague. I'm going to talk about testosterone driven puberty. That is even more vague. Like the term male is not vague. The term female is not vague. It can be defined very, very precisely, and it can be defined in accordance with the best scientific understanding of what sex is. Because think about it. What is sex? Like, sex evolved. It is a evolutionary strategy that involves sperm and ova. So go back, however many millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago, there was once a primordial soup where there was only asexual reproduction. And then sex evolved. Well, what is the thing that evolved that we call sexual reproduction? It has to do with small mobile gametes and large immobile gametes, sperm and egg. That is the whole basis of what sex is. That is what sexual reproduction is all about. That evolutionary divergence from the asexual reproductive process involved the splitting off of small versus large gametes. And that difference between the small and large gametes set up an adaptive pressure such that there are different selection pressures. There is a different game theoretic model in terms of what strategies a female with eggs goes through versus a male with sperm goes through. There's different evolutionary strategies that can be modeled mathematically in terms of what you want to do. If you have a lot of small gametes that are cheap to produce, then you're going to engage in behavioral strategies in your reproduction that involve the proliferation of as much of that genetic material as possible. Whereas if you are a female with expensive relatively fewer larger gametes to produce as part of your reproductive strategy, that's going to infer a different evolutionary strategy. And it's the combination of these two different types of creatures, male creatures and female creatures, working together to reproduce over time and play out different evolutionary strategies. That is the entire scientific basis for understanding the differences between males and females. And it also perfectly illustrates why there is not a third sex. There is only two sexes, male and female, because there is not a third type of gamete. There is sperm and there is ova. There is not a third gamete. Therefore, there are only two sexes, males and females. And that difference between males and females undergirds the basic evolutionary process by which, we have evolved as a species. And, in in mammals and in humans in particular, once you start going down a particular developmental pathway, you either go down the sperm pathway or the egg pathway. During your normal developmental process, when you are developing from like a embryo, basically you either go down the sperm pathway or the egg pathway. And depending on which pathway you go down, your entire body physiologically organizes in a different way that confers sex differentiation that forms the objective difference between males and females. And this is not vague. It's not ambiguous. It's very precise. This is science. This is objective biological reality that has a mind independent existence. This has been proven over and over and over, and is the most parsimonious, logical, and scientifically consistent fashion by which we use the term male and female. If you were let's say a biologist and you are studying dogs, you're going to go out into the field and observe wild dogs or something, and you say oh, hey, that's a male dog. What do you mean when you say that's a male dog? In the biological sciences, you typically refer to a creature that has a predisposition to going down a developmental pathway such that you organize the body around the production of gametes. That is typically what that term means. So this idea that trans women are females and they go through female puberty but this female puberty is testosterone driven, it's ambiguous because there's different ways to go down puberty. One, you can artificially replicate this through the exogenous introduction of hormones by taking them as a pharmaceutical intervention. You can change, you can make yourself go down a testosterone pathway during puberty, but that doesn't change the physiological disposition at the moment of conception as an embryo based on that developmental pathway of going down as an embryo in your development. And while yes, when you have disorders of sexual development, DSDs, intersex, whatever, Like that process can go awry depending on which pathway you go down, but there's still only two pathways. And like trans women, they go down the male pathway, they go down the sperm pathway. And sometimes that pathway can be disturbed in various ways due to environmental or epigenetic factors or whatever, or maybe a genetic condition, such that that process of going down that developmental pathway can be disturbed, and that's what leads to DSDs. That leads to these processes going awry, but that still doesn't negate the fact that you went down this process. And also, most trans women don't have a DSD, they're not intersex, they just go through normal male puberty. And why are we depriving ourselves of our ability to speak with objective, physical, biological language, only to placate the feelings of, these trans women? And it's like, yeah, we don't need to do that. We can acknowledge that trans women are male and still, support their gender identity, use she, her pronouns. Like, we can validate their gender, and we can still say they're male. I mean, this is the old school basis of transsexualism anyway, is that you're a woman born in a male body, and therefore you want to take the hormones and the surgeries and stuff. You want to get laser hair removal on your beard because the male puberty caused you to grow the beard. Like, why are we confusing our language? Like, this is why I care about this issue of sports, because we are confusing our language. We're replacing objective biological categories of sex that come from the scientific world and replacing them with gender identity, with a realm of feelings and identity. Like, and I think we risk losing a lot of precision in our language. We risk our epistemological ability to make our concepts correspond to definitive categories in science by having this confusion, such that we're no longer supposed to be able to talk about males and females as if there's like a real difference like between males and females. Like, it's all like mixed up and confused. Like, trans women are female and also cis women are female, and there's no difference between them. And you can just talk about like going down a testosterone puberty or testosterone driven puberty, but like, why did they go down the testosterone puberty? Why in like 99% of cases, like, people who are born male are going to go down a testosterone pathway? Well, that is the case because they go down the particular developmental pathway of organizing the body around the production of sperm, which typically correlates with going down like a testosterone-driven puberty. The explanation of why trans women go through testosterone-driven puberty is because they're male, because that is a typical thing that happens with males, and that typical thing that happens with males is what confers a physiological advantage relative to females, which is exactly why we divide up male and female sports in the first place. That is why it is not fair for Usain Bolt to compete in the women's division, because Usain Bolt is male and he has male advantage. So it is not fair for Usain Bolt to compete. So, but let's say, Usain Bolt was in his prime and, he came out as transgender. He said, all my life I've had this, identity. I've been dysphoric my entire life. I knew from a young age that I was a girl. Like, I've always known I am a woman. And Usain Bolt, comes out and starts transitioning, goes on hormones for like 1 year, 2 years. Like, are we really going to say that he is 100% female just as much as a cisgender woman is female? No, that's crazy. That is not fair, because like hormones do not erase those differences that Usain Bolt has in virtue of going through male puberty. And it is a bad thing for our society that we no longer have the ability to make reference to the fact that Usain Bolt is a male person. and that he went through male puberty, and that the term male is not vague, and it's not transphobic, and it's not bigoted, and it's not discriminatory to talk about this stuff. Like, you can support trans people and talk about biological reality. You can believe their gender. You can respect their pronouns. You can even call them women if you want. Like that's a totally separate issue. But when we start confusing the issue of sex and gender, when we no longer have a firm basis by which we use the term sex, such that your identity or your feelings, which are purely subjective, which are purely just like coming from an internal gnosis, an internal subjectivity that is not beholden to any sort of empirical proof. Like, if someone says like I identify as a woman, like there's no like objective measurement of that. There's no way to verify that using like the tools of third party science. It's just a subjective feeling, and you just report on it. It's similar to like consciousness. Like, consciousness is just like this subjective thing, and like it's really hard to study it and talk about it in the realm of like empirical science, because it's pure subjectivity, it's pure feeling, it's pure inner subjectivity, and like that is not a good basis for demarcating like the biological difference between males and females. And when we take those subjective states and we replace the biological sex with the subjective states, we lose a great deal of precision. So this idea of like saying that, it's transphobic to say that trans women are male is like completely false, because it is about respecting the truth. And yeah, sometimes like the truth is uncomfortable. And I think a lot of trans women, because their dysphoria is so bad, because the idea of themselves as women is so powerful in their minds, that and given that in our culture there's a very strong correlation between female, that like the term female, the concept female, and the term and concept woman, like those typically go together, because trans people are a minority. So in the conceptual space, like for the vast majority of situations, like if you hear the term woman, you're going to think of someone who is born female. That's just the typical paradigmatic example of what that term means. And so when a trans woman thinks of herself as male, this often causes like a great deal of pain and cognitive dissonance, such that it is more comfortable to think of yourself as female. This is why trans women go get all their like gender documents changed on their birth certificate, because that is like a gender affirming care to be able to like change your birth certificate, because the fact that you were born male causes psychological distress. It causes gender dysphoria. And let's not forget that in the DSM, like severe forms of clinical gender dysphoria are considered a mental illness. It is a psychiatric disease that causes distress, causes pain, causes suffering. So, but we shouldn't let the suffering of people who are gender dysphoric like dictate the scientific language that we use, when we're using that scientific language in a way that is ideologically neutral with respect to the question of respecting the identity of a trans person. Because like I said before, like old school transsexualism, you can respect their identity and validate that, and say that transition, especially for adults who are capable of giving like informed consent, you can say that this is like a legitimate treatment for this gender dysphoria, while at the same time acknowledging that trans women are male. So I don't know, I thought this clip was so like interesting, just because this whole like, oh, like I used air quotes for male puberty, and like I'm a bad person for using the term male puberty. Like I got to chastise myself for not using politically correct language, because using the term male is now like transphobic. Like, I don't know, I think, and this is like a channel that like calls themselves Sci Guys, like science guys. Like they're about the science. Like this entire episode is like so divorced from science. They're not even talking about science. It's pure politics, It's the politics of feelings. It's the politics of the personal. Personal feelings trump everything. Like, they trump the objectivity of language. They trump the objectivity of science. It's just pure subjectivity masquerading as science. And like, look, I get it. Like, I don't want to be disrespectful. I don't want to intentionally cause suffering, but gender dysphoria is like a mental illness according to the DSM, and we shouldn't let the reality distortion field that comes from the process of having gender dysphoria dictate the scientific language we use to describe reality. Because, like, why are we letting the reality distortion that is inherent to gender dysphoria dictate the language that we use? That seems like a dangerous precedent for the epistemology and objectivity of our civilization, which I do think it is important to be able to hold up truth and objectivity as, intrinsically valuable things that are worth pursuing, independent of their impact on like the personal politics of people who are gender dysphoric. So I've said enough for this video. I'm going to stop there. Thanks for watching. Bye.